Regardless of what side of the political aisle that you land on, I think a hefty amount of skepticism is a good thing, especially when it comes to the media, because you often shouldn't take everything the media says at face value. Case in point, the subject of today's video. Today's story involves promotional material for Wreck-It Ralph, more specifically a tie-in arcade game that was touring the US for the upcoming movie. The arcade game in question is known as Fix-It Felix Jr., and as stated by the local Cincinnati media, the deranged fan who drove thousands of miles to play it.
Tonight, 9 News met a man who drove 1,000 miles to play a video game in Cincinnati. Well, you have one more chance to play Fix-It Felix Jr. tomorrow night, and then it hits the road and heads somewhere else, and maybe Mr. McGuckin will find it in another location.
Because he decided to come up here.
From Florida.
From Florida, that's what it was.
Yeah. Right.
So,
wow, that is a man dedicated to
committed.
Video games. Yeah, committed is right.
All right.
Committed might just be the word, but listen.
I can't make this up, and I can't make this up.
I can't make this up.
Evidently you can. This is the story of the crazy Florida man that drove thousands of miles to play Fix-It Felix Jr., or rather the true story of what actually happened. The Fix-It Felix Jr. arcade game was created in 2012 and was released on various platforms including iOS and Android, which is no longer available, but if you do some digging on the internet, you can find it pretty easily to play. However, as a promotional tie-in for the original Wreck-It Ralph movie, 7 cabinets were created and toured the country promoting the upcoming film. This brings us to the ABC9 interview in Cincinnati, Ohio at Legacy Arcade, where the supposed crazy Florida man was interviewed. That man is known as AJ McGuckin.
AJ McGuckin came all the way from Florida to play the new video game Fix-It Felix Jr. at Arcade Legacy and Cincinnati Mall tonight. Can't make this up. The classic arcade game console is just one of 7 traveling the country. The game features classic video game stars Fix-It Felix and Wreck-It Ralph.
The whole premise is he destroys buildings and you play as Fix-It Felix Jr. So you want to fix the buildings.
Okay.
One thing to keep in mind is that this incident took place back in 2012, which is still about 10 years away from now, and despite that fact, video gaming was still super hyper stigmatized by people in the media. And as you probably noticed, the news anchors jumped at the opportunity to basically act like they were all superior and better than anybody else that went to this fucking event.
Okay.
Let's look a little deeper into the story though, as on surface level, it seems as though the local Cincinnati news just got lucky in finding this deranged Wreck-It Ralph fan who drove thousands of miles.
It's a game that is made like a retro game. It's not from the 80s, even though it says like copyright 1982 on it. It's based from the movie Wreck-It Ralph, where Ralph is the bad guy in the game. And it's kind of based off of like Donkey Kong. He's essentially the Donkey Kong of the game. The whole premise is he destroys buildings and you play as Fix-It Felix Jr. So you want to fix the buildings.
Now, after watching that, you may be thinking to yourself, that dude seems pretty sane, rational, and kind of has his shit together, right? That's because he does. And the media lied.
But that's just plain nuts! Many of you out there are thinking, right?
I know, the media lying. Stop the fucking presses, right? So, the truth. AJ McGuckin actually is an Ohio native and used to live in Cincinnati. And he used to work at the arcade that this promotional event took place. In fact, he was friends with the owner since it was originally built. You may be thinking to yourself that may not necessarily completely justify traveling thousands of miles just for this one event, but that also too is partially a fabrication by the media. See, AJ wasn't actually in town for the event, it just happened to take place at the same time. It took place around November, which is around the time he would go home to visit his family. AJ had worked at Arcade Legacy in the past, and while he was in town, he decided to take a trip down to his old work, which took place the same night as the promotional event. Now, with the news coming, Jesse, the owner, asked AJ if he wanted to be interviewed on behalf of the store, and he agreed to do so. If you look back at the footage, you can even see he's wearing a shirt that the other employees wore. So, where did the traveling thousands of miles thing even come from? So it turns out that the whole thing was originally just a rib from one of his friends. During the interview, one of AJ's buddies decided to play a joke on him and shout, "He drove thousands of miles for this." After this happened, the interviewer stopped interviewing AJ briefly. I imagine it was probably like an awkward silence for a couple of seconds, and then they proceeded as normal with the rest of the interview. And it wasn't actually until later that evening that AJ found out through a friend that the media had basically taken that one out of context joke and decided to run that as the main story, basically painting him as this crazy loony fan. And admittedly, a frenzied fan deciding to go and play some arcade game for a movie that's not even out yet does have a pretty funny notion to it, but the fact that they had to lie about it It's just, I don't know, to me that just is complete bullshit.
Bullshit.
I mean, what do you expect? It's the local Channel 9 news. The worst part is AJ had told them virtually everything I said in this video, in his interview. Visiting family, doing this as a favor, but the news aired none of it. So you might be asking yourself, do I even have any proof of my claims against the media and basically calling the media fucking liars for this one news event? Well...
Oh, hey there. Big video gamer here, according to ABC News in Cincinnati, so thanks for that, ABC. But yes, I am the one from the video, and it is entirely true. I did used to live in Cincinnati, and then I moved to Florida. Gross, don't live there anymore. But during that year, I just happened to be driving up to visit my family for the holidays, because Wreck-It Ralph came out right around the time of, like, it was before Thanksgiving, it was like towards the end of October, so I was going up there for Thanksgiving. But I figured I had to stop at the arcade because it's one of my favorite places. The owner, Jesse's a good friend of mine. And when I was there, he told me about the event and asked me if I wanted to be the spokesperson for it. So everything that I talked about was indeed cut. The whole point of the interview was to promote Arcade Legacy and Pixar's new movie, Wreck-It Ralph. They had done this going across the country to a lot of different arcades. However, once my friend decided to do that bullshit with the, he drove 1,000 miles for this, they decided to make the story about me, this crazed maniac from Florida who just had to get my hands on Wreck-It Ralph and Fix-It Felix and play the game. So, yeah, everything I talked about in that interview, completely cut. They decided to make fun of me on the news, and it was a wonderful, funny time. At the time, I was a little bit more pissed, but looking back at it now, it's fucking whatever. You know, it's a good story, it's a good laugh. So, yeah, I guess just lesson learned, never trust the news with anything, ever.
Truth is, I actually made contact with AJ about a year ago when I did my Shaq Fu video, and he also appeared in my Rebel Light year-end special for last year. He ended up telling me his story, and I thought the whole thing was ridiculous, and I needed to talk about it, as it seemed like it would fit my channel style and whatnot. I have AJ's YouTube channel linked below. He makes some good video game essays and videos, so make sure to go check him out and sub. Definitely make sure to go sub to AJ's channel, because he does make really good video game content, and I do want to say thank you for coming on here to tell your story, because I still think it's bullshit the media decided to lie that bad. Like, were there fucking, was it that slow in Cincinnati where they had to run that as one of their top stories? I'll never know. But either way, thanks for coming on to the channel, AJ. Like I said in the beginning, you shouldn't always take what the media says at face value, because as you just saw, they don't care about the truth. AJ did let me know that as of now, the arcade cabinet is no longer there since it was a promotional bid. However, I found articles from 2014 stating they were sold for $20,000 each. At the end of the day, funny story, but screw that news station and the anchors for acting like assholes. Make sure to keep things light and rebellious, and I'll see you guys next time.
Okay.